For me, what I'm really interested in is capturing everything on the day, and the fact is that I can do that with the kind of a safety net of Melodyne, knowing that I can kind of do some tweaking later. Hi, I'm Kipper. I'm a producer, writer and label owner, and we're here at Lower Barn Studios in Haslemere talking about Melodyne. Yeah, well, I mean, I've made music since I was 7 years old. I got my first guitar when I was 7 and learnt to play Jimi Hendrix, Sunshine of Your Love, and basically throughout my teenage years I had bands, and finally I had a band called One Nation that got signed in the early 80s, got signed to IRS Records. They were a small label and the budget was small, so I was able to sort of say, well, why don't you let me produce it? And that gave me a real appetite for production. After that I then kind of came out of the band and started being more of a jobbing producer, writer, and I worked with Gary Newman. I produced a couple of albums for Gary Newman, which was kind of my first real experience of working with an artist who had a very strong, definable approach, and sort of having to kind of deal with him and also trying to get something different out of him. And that's when I kind of started to learn what production was like for someone else, because when you produce yourself, you're kind of doing what you do. Yes, so then having worked with Gary Newman, I then went on to work with a guy called Jeff Wayne, who did The War of the Worlds, and we did a host of projects. And then started working in film, and I got to produce a few tracks for a chap called Trevor Jones, a big Hollywood film composer. This was the time I sort of felt like I was sort of arriving, when I felt confident and felt like I'd grown into the role of, I felt like I could put producer on my passport. And through working with Trevor is how I came to meet Sting. I was doing a Sharon Stone movie called The Mighty, and Sting came in and I kind of was involved in the production of the track for the movie with Trevor and Sting. And as Sting kind of recognised my potential as producer and invited me to go out to Tuscany and work with him on what became the Brand New Day record. And it did feel a bit like Jim Fixit for me to be in Tuscany, spending a year recording 10 tracks. It was sort of, having done a lot of jobbing work. And then from that, I then got to work with loads of people, with J Blige, with James Taylor, with Stevie Wonder, and Chris Botti, with Curtis Stigers, and Richard Marx, and it flowed from that really, and the confidence means that I could then be very relaxed and very confident with different artists in different situations. My studio, yeah, I love it. It's the kind of place I always dreamt of having. I mean, I do here, my main purpose of this place is for writing, recording vocals, and sometimes if the budgets are small, I might record drums here. But I use Logic with the Pro Tools front end, using a 192 and an Apogee Big Ben to clock that off. I've got an old TLA desk that's a valve desk that kind of gives a bit of warmth to the digital signals. A plethora of plugins, the normal sort of plugins that everyone would have. Melodyne. I discovered Melodyne back in, I think it must have been 2004, 2005. I was working in LA with a great engineer called Nathaniel Kunkel, and in fact, I'm not sure of the exact dates that Melodyne came out, but this is when I first saw it in action, and we were working with Sean Colvin, who's one of my favourite singers. She'd done this amazing vocal. We only had a little window to record her, and she'd done this great vocal, but there was just a couple of notes that kind of just weren't quite perfect, and there was no chance of us getting back into the studio with her. And Nathaniel said, well, let's use Melodyne. I've just got it. Let's get it in. And I saw the waveform for the first time, as is on the screen there, and just nudged out these two words and made the perfect vocal. And I was kind of hooked. I like to use it sparingly. I'm not, I like to work with great singers, and So I'm not using it as to completely get rid of all the imperfections of singers. I kind of use it for that reason, mostly, with singers at least, is to, having captured something great, to just kind of be able to tweak it if needed. I suppose it's given me a lot more options. If I've done things with keys, changing keys of songs, and not being frightened to do that because you're thinking, oh, I had that amazing performance. I did a track with Curtis Stigers, and he played sax on this track. And again, he lives out in America. I only had him for a day, and I knew that after he'd left, and I kind of did a vocal on this track, I realised it was in the wrong key, and I had to change the key of the track. And I wasn't scared to do it because I knew that the quality of Melodyne was that going up or down a third wasn't going to change the quality of the recording, and it maintained the honestness of the recording, and that's the kind of how it's amazing for me. Is it kind of gives me that flexibility and more options. I have done that. I've done that with some guitar actually. I've done a bit. I worked on a film about Princess Diana, and I did a track with an artist called Esther Alexander called Look in the Mirror. And we had this guitar player come down and play beautiful guitar, but the guitar was just a little bit, the intonation of the guitar was out. So I kind of called up, I mean, I'd love to meet the guys that invented it, but I called up the multi-timbral view of each string and was able to kind of tweak the string, tweak the performance, and have this great. Again, he played perfectly, and it was just this guitar on that day wasn't quite as sweet as it might have been, and so that was a real mind-blowing experience for me. I mean, the way that I use Melodyne, and the way that I try and preserve the realness of a performance and not get too microscopic is I do two ways. I've got Bradley who works with me, who's a great musician and engineer, and we'll get a vocal. We've just been working with a lady called Elizabeth McGovern, who's from Downton Abbey, and she's got this little folk band, and she's got a record coming out. And so we'll get a great performance that we love and that kind of stands up on its own. I'll then give it to Bradley. We'll listen through. I'll give it to Bradley. He's got Melodyne on another setup. And we'll just go through all the words that I'm kind of not particularly happy with and things that are very obvious without kind of listening too deeply. And we'll get a version of Melodyne, a Melodyne vocal with those kind of fixes done. I'll then do a completely Melodyne, kind of pulling it in very tightly. So I'll have that track. I'll have the little kind of words that really bother me, and the original vocal. I'll then cut in the words that have really bothered me into the original track. Then I've got this super tuned one that then after I've worked on the track for 3 days and I'm completely filled up with it, I'll kind of know the vocal inside out and I'll know what bothers me, and then I'll cut in the super tuned one into any remaining little areas that I think are bothering me, and that's kind of how I do it. So it's always cut into the original recording of the track, preserving that. Melodyne is a revolutionary tool in that you don't have to, what you've recorded on the day isn't the committed performance necessarily. The fact that you can change intonation on a guitar, you can change the voicings on a guitar, you can add harmonies. And I suppose, I mean, for me, it just is an additional tool that gives me this kind of scope of flexibility. And I like, for me, what I'm really interested in is capturing everything on the day, and the fact is that I can do that with the kind of a safety net of Melodyne, knowing that I can kind of do some tweaking later.